Hi friends, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be doing another monthly wrap up and talking about all the books I read in November. In November, I made it my mission to find a new 5-star read because I haven't found a 5-star read since the beginning of August. I have been in the biggest drought reading wise. I've read so many 3 stars recently, and in October that was really getting to me because I read quite a few bad books. I am happy to say that we found 2 new 5-star reads, so I'm super excited to talk about those. And then we're also going to talk about some books I really wouldn't recommend you read. If you're new here, I like to start my monthly wrap-ups with some stats, so let's go ahead and talk about our genre breakdowns. I read 9 books in total, however one of those was a DNF. Out of those 9 books, 4 were fantasy, 3 were romance, and 2 were just standard fiction. If you watched my TBR board game at the start of November, I read 4 of the 6 books chosen on that TBR. With the 2 5-star reads I had this month, my average rating did go up as well. My average rating for the month was a 3.78, and out of my total pages read, I read 3,315 pages in total. I also mentioned last month how I've been loving Fable, and Fable allows you to create a little graphic of your monthly wrap-up. So I'm going to also pop that here just so we can get a little bit of a visual as well, a little bit of a sneak peek in the books I will be talking about. And with all that being said, I guess it's time to hop on in and talk about some books. As I mentioned that my mission for the month was finding a 5-star read, I had asked a friend of mine what was a 5-star read that stuck out to her, what would she recommend, and she recommended that I read Malibu Rising by Taylor Jenkins Reid. This is the first book I've ever read by Taylor Jenkins Reid. I know she has a pretty large cult following on Book Talk. I managed to get this right away from my library and listen to this as an audiobook, and the basis of this story is that it's a historical fiction novel following a dual timeline. In one timeline, we're in like the 1950s or so, following the love story of Mick and June Riva, and then the second timeline is in the 1980s, following their 4 children over the course of 24 hours on a night where their lives will change forever. One thing that really stuck out to me in the writing with this is that it's written in 3rd person, and it reminded me a lot of Ellen Hildebrand's writing style, where you're just following so many characters. At first it was really overwhelming to keep track of everyone, but eventually I did like getting such an inside perspective to just about every character we interacted with. I would say this book was a little bit more triggering than I anticipated it would be. If you have triggers around cheating or alcoholism, I would be aware of that going into this. I've never really found cheating to be a trigger of mine before, but the amount of cheating was way more triggering than I thought it would be, and I had to pause and take multiple breaks throughout this story because some of the things that transpired and happened just made me so uncomfortable. And I can acknowledge that that was kind of the purpose of the story. It wasn't written to make me feel good, but I have to be honest, I was a bit surprised at the emotional impact some of the things did have on me. My friend had said that this book will definitely make me feel something, and it certainly accomplished that goal. Just unfortunately for me, I wasn't left feeling almost any positive emotions, which is why I gave this a 3.75. This is a very strong 3. It's almost a 4. I think if the story had been spun a little bit more positively for some of our characters, this could have been bumped up to a 4. There is a storyline in this book that really makes me want to pick up Carrie Soto is Back by Taylor Jenkins Reid. If you've read this, you certainly know what part of the book I'm referring to. So I don't think this is the last book I will read by Taylor Jenkins Reid, but I definitely need to be in a strong mental place if I want to read something by her moving forward. Next book we have is pretty much the opposite of something that leaves an emotional impact. I read The Wingman by Stephanie Archer. This is a spicy hockey romance in the Vancouver Storm series where we follow Hayden and Darcy. Darcy recently just got out of a long-term relationship and she's just wanting a fresh start. So she moves to a new city and moves in with her long-term friend Hayden, and wants to learn how to get back into the dating field. She views Hayden very much as a player, a ladies' man, and so they kind of enter into this agreement where Hayden's going to be her wingman and teach her how to be a player. But of course, within this trope always lies that lines start to get blurred between dating coach or something more, and these friends slowly start to realize that they want to be more than friends. I gave this a 3.25 because I did enjoy my time while reading this. There were multiple points where I like giggled out loud because this was just so silly. However, some of the pitfalls for me with this book is that it was just simply way too long. I think it was like 80 chapters, which no hockey romance needs to be 80 chapters. There was also a ton of miscommunication, mainly done by Darcy. She would just automatically assume Hayden's feelings in a situation, and even after he would clarify his feelings in a situation, she would just continue to assume wrongly how he's feeling. And it was just very frustrating to see her do that over and over and over again, especially considering the backstory these two have of being longtime friends and close with one another. It was just frustrating why miscommunication would be such a pivotal part of their relationship, because I don't think it's that far-fetched that long-term friends would know how to talk to one another. Regarding the spice, I do feel like it was handled well in the story because how Hayden chose to implement the spice, the tension was able to be dragged out for quite an extended period of time. Because I know for a lot of people, once the first spicy scene happens, the book kind of goes downhill because that element of tension and what we're building up to is broken. I would say that that is extended for a nice period of time. It does keep you engaged in that storyline, but this is not the one for the faint of heart. There are quite a few spicy scenes, but if that's not something you're into, I would say that not only is this book a pass, but just about anything from Stephanie Archer is a pass because she writes very spicy books. Third book of the month, I had such high hopes for this one, but this one did let me down a little bit. I finally read Funny Story by Emily Henry. I have been delaying reading this because I want to get the book in paperback, as all of my other Emily Henry books are in paperback, but it is still only available in a hardcover right now. So I did just end up getting this as an audiobook from my library. And I will say this is the one and only Emily Henry book that I've solely just listened to. And I will say that might have impacted my enjoyment level of the book. So I would be willing to give this one a reread at a later date to see if I enjoy it more then. But for right now, I gave this a 3.75. The plot of this book is absolutely wild. We follow Daphne and Miles. Daphne was engaged to Peter. While Peter was on his bachelor trip, also his best friend Petra went on the bachelor trip as well. After a night of drinking, these two realized that actually Peter and Petra want to be together. Petra was in a relationship with Miles, but these two end up leaving their long-term partners to be together, and it kind of leaves Daphne and Miles in a very awkward situation to where they end up moving in together because Daphne has nowhere else to go and Miles needs someone to help pay rent. We follow Miles and Daphne's journey, healing, rebuilding, and then also building up a friendship while they are roommates. And then, just to add another layer of complication to the story, these two end up fake dating to make Peter and Petra jealous. I hope you can see just how convoluted this plot truly is. Between Miles and Daphne, it's kind of an opposites attract romance because Daphne is a very buttoned up librarian and Miles is very much a free spirit. But as Daphne really lost herself throughout her relationship with Peter, Miles is really able to help Daphne build a life that she loves and find herself post-breakup. This did end up being my least favorite Emily Henry book I've read thus far. I couldn't really see myself in Daphne or Miles, so I couldn't really fully connect to their characters. And it does feel a little bit ironic that I couldn't connect to these characters because it feels like we got so much time with them. I think the time period across this book was several months, so the relationship actually really doesn't feel rushed at all. I just actually think we got a little bit too much time with them. While I can say that I think this is justifiably a good book, I do think it dragged a bit and I couldn't really connect to the characters, so therefore I really don't think I can justify giving this 4 stars, 3.75, and hopefully on a reread I'll be able to connect to the characters a little bit more. Within a bookshelf scavenger hunt reading vlog, which I'll make sure to link above, I read Love Theoretically by Ali Hazelwood. I think this is my 3rd book I've read by Ali Hazelwood. I had high hopes going into this one, but overall I think this one continued to miss the mark a little bit for me. In my reading vlog, I think I said I was between a 3 to a 3.25. I'm going to settle on a 3 stars for this because since I've read this book, I have literally never thought about this once. We mainly follow Elsie, who's an adjunct professor teaching theoretical physics. Unfortunately, she hates her job and she makes absolutely no money, so she also has a side gig where she fake dates men on this dating app, and she has a favorite customer, Greg. Really, throughout this dating app, you're not supposed to have repeat customers, but since Greg's her favorite, she's gone to multiple family functions with him, and at those family functions, she's also met Greg's brother, Jack. When Elsie applies for a new teaching position at MIT, she realizes that Jack is actually part of the hiring committee. Now this causes some problems because Elsie has never mentioned being a physicist to Jack. She's actually told Jack that she's a librarian, so Jack is very confused whenever he sees her. He thinks she's a fraud, he thinks that she's scamming his brother, but luckily that plotline gets resolved fairly quickly, and actually whether Elsie receives this teaching position or not also gets resolved by about midway through the book. So for the second half of the book, we're mainly just focused on Jack and Elsie's romance, and a lot of their relationship is focused on Jack encouraging Elsie to be herself. She has one of the most extreme cases of people pleasing I've ever read about, where she just completely morphs her personality to who she's with, to the point where Elsie just has no concept of what her personality is, and Jack picks up on that right away and calls her out on it. I did enjoy seeing Elsie rebuild herself and these two coming together, but again, I just really could not connect to these characters at all. This did not make any sort of emotional impact on me whatsoever, and as I mentioned previously, I have not thought of these characters since reading this book, so I just couldn't justify anything beyond a 3 stars. Oh boy. Talking about another book that really missed the mark for me, I read Angel Falls by Kristin Hannah. I had so much hope in this book. I've only heard amazing things about Kristin Hannah, but I did realize after the fact that this is one of Kristin Hannah's oldest novels, if not her debut. This was originally released in the year 2000, so this book does feel quite dated. The premise of this one is following a family. The mother and wife of the family, Michaela, has a horseback riding accident and ends up in a coma. And we're mainly within her husband Liam's perspective, but she also has 2 kids, a daughter and a young son, where we get brief moments in their perspective as well, and we just follow this family trying to cope and survive the tragedy that has happened with their mom or wife. One thing that was very unexpected for me throughout reading this is this had a very heavy religious undertone to it, which I was not expecting. Kind of the messaging throughout this was, well, if we just hope, pray, and love her enough, that will wake her up from a coma. That turns out to not really be the case, but it was just such a heavily discussed topic that kind of took me by surprise and lowered my enjoyment level. I felt like how the 9-year-old son was written was really bizarre. The 9-year-old son is actually with his mom whenever she has the accident, and he witnesses it. So that is obviously a very traumatic event for a young child to go through, but as we're mostly in the father's perspective, he calls the boy pathetic multiple times about how he's coping with the accident. And I just felt like that was the most bizarre way to talk about a child during such an emotionally charged event. And I don't feel like the father did a good job of parenting him throughout that whole situation. There's also a storyline following Michaela's ex-husband, reintroducing him back into the picture, learning more about their relationship and why it ended. That whole storyline was just like unnecessary and unlikable. Because of that, I was very excited for this book to be over with. So whenever I just am looking forward to a story being over, it automatically is falling into the 2-star range. On a bad day, I could see me rating this a 2 stars. I'm going to give it a 2.5, but really, in all honesty, I wouldn't recommend this book to anyone. Even if you don't mind the religious undertones, I just don't think the messaging of this story was good. I don't know what the author was trying to say, and I would say like our 3 main characters of the story just had so many flaws and handled multiple situations so incorrectly that I hope I never have to think about this story again. I promise, guys, things get better after this book. Welcome to our final absolute mess of the month. I finally attempted to read the Zodiac Academy. I have had this book on my TBR multiple times. I've had this on my shelf for years, and I've just been avoiding this like the plague. I finally decided enough was enough. I need to at least try and pick up this book this month. And I will say I disliked this so much to the point I DNF'd it at 39%. I honestly considered DNFing this way sooner, but I felt like it was unfair to DNF a book at chapter 3. So I made it all the way to chapter 10 just to fully solidify the fact that I hate this book. I know this has a very large cult following, so I don't want to offend anyone. If you like this book, I am so happy for you. It is completely okay for people to have differing opinions. The way this was written just really didn't do anything for me. It was written so immaturely. I felt like it was written by high schoolers. Throughout the story, we get a dual POV following 2 twins, Darcy and Tori. These 2 get approached while they're living in the mortal realm by a professor who works at the Zodiac Academy, where they are then brought to the Fey world of Solaria, where they are the heirs to this throne in this kingdom if they're able to graduate from the Zodiac Academy. However, it's never as simple as that. There's already been 4 celestial families who have risen up in place of the king and queen, and each have an heir. So at the Zodiac Academy, there are 4 celestial heirs that see Darcy and Tori as a threat to their ascension to power. Within the first hour of them being at this Zodiac Academy, the 4 boys start doing the most awful and questionable things to these girls. And I've heard that this has been referenced as a bully romance, but it's just physical abuse. Also, the dialogue within this is so cringe. After one of the guys is just abusing one of the twins, he's then like extremely touchy and feely towards her, and she's like, "Why are you touching me like that?" And he's like, "Because I'm an alpha, babe." And another situation where they're choosing what house they're going to be in because the school is separated within the 4 elements. And there's this conversation between the girlfriend of one of the alphas, and she's like, "That's my bae." And I was like, oh dear Lord. And then within the school, there's a social media platform called Facebook instead of Facebook. And whenever I read that, I was just like, absolutely the fuck not. Maybe this is written for like 17, 18-year-olds, but for me at 25, I simply could not put myself through this writing style. And if you have any choice in the matter, I really wouldn't encourage you to do so either. As promised, that was our last bad book of the month. Now I am going to briefly praise the 3 books that I read in the Throne of Glass series. I'm only going to do the briefest of descriptions of this series because I did an entire reading vlog. I would say spoiler free about the series, which I will make sure to link above. If you want to see in-depth thoughts and my reactions to a lot of the crazy things that happen within these books, make sure to go check out that video. One of the big discussions around the Throne of Glass series is what order to read them in. The prequel series, The Assassin's Blade, can be read at multiple different points. There is a lot of discussion and discourse around when to read it. I personally read it first, and I would 100% recommend that you do so as well. As this is the prequel, I think it makes the most sense chronologically to start this way. You get introduced to our female main character, Celaena Sardathian, who is basically an indentured assassin being trained by the king of the assassins, Erebin Hamel. You follow her on some missions. You also see her make some enemies and friendships along the way, and you just overall get a good grasp of Celaena's backstory before moving into Throne of Glass. Why I would say it's so important to read The Assassin's Blade first is the different stories we see within that book are heavily referenced throughout Throne of Glass and Crown of Midnight. Personally, without the backstory, I think you would be so lost and you would miss so many key moments and places of emotional impact simply because you don't know the backstory. While I could see all of the potential that was happening within The Assassin's Blade, I did just give this one a 4-star. Like mentioned, we meet some enemies, we meet some allies, and at the time I could theorize how they would come into play later, but as this book is separated between 5 novellas, I don't feel like we had enough time to fully develop the emotional connection to Celaena that I would have needed to give this a 5 stars, but I do feel like this was a very strong start to the series. Going into Throne of Glass, this one is so action-packed. There is a competition aspect to this book that feels very much like The Hunger Games. Cutthroat, deadly. We get to see Celaena being an absolute badass throughout it. I completely fell in love with her throughout this book. We also get introduced to a fun little love triangle that happens, and I love both parties involved in that love triangle. This was an easy 5-star for me. And then continuing into Crown of Midnight, Celaena just continues to be more and more powerful. We get a huge reveal at the end of this book that I think just sets up the rest of the world so nicely. And I can just tell that the next book, Heir of Fire, is going to be absolutely crazy. This was another easy 5 stars, and I cannot wait to continue the series. So that is my November wrapped up. We had some highs, we had some lows. My previous video was putting out my December TBR, and I'm very excited for the books I have lined up for December. Comment down below your favorite or least favorite book that you read in November, and make sure that you like and subscribe so that you don't miss any of our upcoming videos. This is where I will love you and leave you, but thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one. Bye guys!